Hi, everybody. My name is Brad Kramer with Provanio Consulting. And today I wanted to go through some of the items from OSHA's top 10 most cited standards. And today I'm going to address the five most common that are affect general industry. So not looking at construction standards today, just going through those general industry standards and talking about some easy things that most companies can do that I see all the time where there's non-compliance and safety issues and some ways to correct them. So we're going to talk about HAZCOM program, lockout tagout, respiratory protection, powered industrial trucks, and machine guarding. So I'll go through them, just spending 1 or 2 minutes on each one and give you some tools and some quick guidance on how to easily get in compliance with them. So the first one that we'll talk about is the hazard communication program. So hazard communication, broke down very simply, is employees have a right to know what chemicals and what hazards they're going to be exposed to with working with those chemicals in the workplace. So the main thing is actually making sure that you have a policy, a program in place that basically breaks down what the different uses for chemicals are in the facility and what policies and procedures your company has. So you want to make sure that you have that policy and making sure that safety data sheets or SDSs are accessible by everybody in the workplace. A lot of times a company will take those safety data sheets and put them on, let's say like an account like 3E or MSDS online, but not everybody has access to the password or something to get access to them, or they don't know how to get to them, right? So if you're going to have it online like that, make sure all your employees have access to whatever login information they need, and really stress that, drum it into them over and over again that they have access to it, so that when they do want to see something or whatever, they're not confused how to do it. The other problem is sometimes it'll be like on a work drive, so a drive um, at the location that not all employees will have an access to that computer drive. So if it's on, one person's computer or a drive that not everybody can get to, or not everybody has computer access, that means that not everybody has access to those SDSs, and that can be a big issue. That is one of the most common questions that OSHA does ask during an inspection. They'll ask a random employee, do you have access to your safety data sheets? And if they don't know, then typically that's a citation for you. All right, so make sure those SDSs are available to everybody as well as your program. And you're required to do initial training. So before an employee actually goes on the shop floor and starts their job, they should be trained on where to find those safety data sheets on your HAZCOM program, and anything else related to that. Anytime you have changes in the workplace, then they should be retrained. And in Minnesota specifically, Minnesota has a standard that all employees have to be trained every year. All right. So federal OSHA does not require annual training for HAZCOM, but Minnesota OSHA does. And here I'm going to show you a quick, easy way to label containers. OSHA does require that if you have a container that's going to be used, and um, it's going to be used for, say, more than one shift, so not just while that person is working, but let's say you have a bottle of oil, right, and a spray bottle, right? So if that bottle of oil is going to stay out there for more than one shift and leave the control of that operator, then it has to be labeled accordingly. So to make that really simple, Avery, Avery, and I think there's a few other programs out there as well, but Avery sells the templates, the stickers and the templates that go with it. And a lot of these are pre-populated so that when you go to print out those stickers on your computer, everything is already done for you. You don't have to make that GHS label up from scratch. So here I'm at the Avery template, and let's say I have a bottle of ammonia, right? Let's say it's window, I use it for window cleaner or something like that. All right, so I just click on ammonia and voila, it pre-populates it for me because they have a whole bunch of chemicals like this in their database. So I don't have to go and fill all this stuff out. Avery's already got it for me. It's quick, it's easy, it's free, other than the cost of your stickers. So that's one easy way to make those GHS labels for like bottles of oil and stuff like that. All right, so coming back to camera here. So very quick, easy way for you to comply with the HAZCOM program requirements. Next, let's talk about lockout tagout programs. The main thing there is actually having a policy, a program in place and making sure there's a procedure for every piece of equipment. That's a big job. A lot of times at making all those policy or those procedures in the first place takes a lot of time and energy, but usually when you have a good procedure in place, now it's just the maintenance of it. So what's required for training is you should have initial training before any employee goes out on the plant floor and starts operating equipment. So they should be trained on how to lock that equipment out. And the maintenance for that program is a big one because every year you have to ensure that every lockout procedure is accurate. So making sure that nothing has changed on that equipment, something hasn't been rewired or something like that. And employees have to be trained every year, and those employees they have to demonstrate every year that they're familiar with the lockout procedures that you have in place. So that is one big place that employers often fall behind is they'll do that initial training, but then every year they don't verify that the employees and the machines are up to date with procedures and their training and verifications. The other thing is recognizing that there is a difference between a lockout lock and an out of service lock, right? So an out of service lock would be, so let's say I have a food manufacturing plant, right? And so when a piece of equipment is worked on or cleaned or anything like that, it has to be secured until, let's say, QA inspects it and approves it for use, right? So in that case, you'd be using a out of service lock. So the requirements for an out of service lock would be different for a lockout lock. A lockout lock is designed to make sure that nobody else can start that equipment while an employee is working on that equipment. If nobody's working on that equipment, it's considered out of service, not locked out. Right. So a lot of times out of service locks will have multiple keys for every lock. And that's a big issue when we talk about lockout locks is lockout locks should never have more than one key for that lock. There should never be a master key. There should never be like multiple supervisors have keys for those locks or anything like that. One key, one lock, right? And only that employee who possesses that key should be able to open that lock. So making sure you have a differentiation between your out of service locks and your lockout locks, right? Next, we'll talk about respiratory protection program. So one issue that employers often fall behind in is not actually having a good comprehensive program or policy in place for their respirators that tells what a qualified employee is, so which employees have to wear it, where the hazards exist, and what type of respirator to wear, and really breaks down who manages the program, who does the annual fit test and stuff like that. All right, so that program needs to be in place, and every employee before they wear a respirator is required to go through training on your policy. They should be fit tested and have a medical evaluation completed by a competent medical person. That might include a nurse, a doctor, or somebody that's trained and authorized to do so. Right, so they should be a licensed medical professional. Making sure that that person is able to wear a respirator. All right, so making sure that person's actually fit tested before they wear that respirator and then have the medical evaluation. And then they should go through periodic retraining. And the other thing is making sure that your respirators are stored correctly, right? Sorry about that. So making sure that like my respirator is in a bag, it's sealed, it has my name on it and stuff like that. So another employee isn't going to inadvertently use it. And it should never be sitting out in the open, gathering dust or chemical residue or anything else like that. All right. So now we'll jump on to powered industrial trucks. Very rarely do I walk into a manufacturing facility and find their powered industrial truck or PIT program, PIT, up to par, right? Usually there's a lot of training missing. The recurring evaluations aren't being done, daily inspections aren't being done and stuff like that. So that's one of the biggest things that I see either when I've been a plant manager or a EHS manager in different plants or as a consultant going into companies. All right, so before any employee operates any piece of powered equipment, powered mobile equipment, so we're talking about forklifts, aerial lifts, boom lifts, skid steer loaders, tuggers, anything like that, those are all considered powered industrial trucks, right? So the forklift training isn't just for forklifts. You should have powered industrial training for every type of equipment that you have that's mobile like that, and make sure every employee is trained on everything that they use. All right. Then that equipment needs to be inspected every day that it's used. All right. So that making sure that every day before that equipment is put in service, somebody should be inspecting it. And if there's anything wrong with that equipment, if it's going to affect the safety of that equipment, it should be taken out of service. At the very least, if it's not a safety concern, but there is something faulty with it, making sure that a work order is entered for it, however your work order system is. The other thing that I see a lot of is alterations. So there should be no alterations to a forklift or any type of industrial truck, including like drilling through the roll cage, adding attachments or anything like that that isn't approved by either the manufacturer or an engineer. So if I'm going to be using an attachment, say clamps or fork extenders or a man basket on a forklift, I need to get that approved by the forklift manufacturer or distributor. Typically, that's going to be fairly easy to get as long as you're using a piece of equipment that was manufactured by a reputable manufacturer. So, for example, if I bought a man basket from Granger or Fastenal or a company like that, I should be able to refer that the manufacturer of that man basket back to my forklift distribution company, and they can get me a new data plate that reflects how that forklift will operate with that attachment on it. All right, and then that should go on the data plate. So they'll send me a new data plate. I replace my old data plate with that one. And it's actually a fairly simple process. Usually most forklifts sales companies will do that for free, or they might charge you a few bucks for the data plate, but it's relatively easy as long as you're putting on a quality piece of equipment that comes from a reputable manufacturer rather than say making your own forklift extensions or something like that, right? If you do make your own equipment, then you need somebody that's a qualified engineer to rate that equipment. So they're going to make sure that it doesn't affect the stability of that forklift. It's not going to be overloaded, anything like that, and replace that data plate then. All right, and then every 3 years, every operator should be reevaluated. They don't need to go through the full training. They just need to go through an evaluation process to make sure that that they're operating that forklift correctly. The only exception would be if you got in new equipment that's different than the types of forklift or other equipment you have, or something has changed in the workplace. In that case, then you want to retrain them based on that new equipment or what the changes are. All right. Moving on to machine guarding. This is also a big one that I see quite a bit of. A lot of problems in the work site. Machines don't necessarily come guarded from the manufacturer. So if you buy a big new piece of machinery, don't assume that that thing is going to meet OSHA standards, all right? And OSHA actually refers back to ANSI B11. So you can go to a lot of manufacturers and say, I want this equipment to meet the ANSI B11 standard. Typically, there might oftentimes be additional costs for that, but I would definitely get that in writing from that manufacturer if they claim that that equipment does meet all the ANSI standards. So that way, that equipment is actually put on by a manufacturer, so you don't have to worry about trying to paint it right or fabricate it or anything like that. But get that in writing so that if that equipment comes and you do your due diligence and you look and you make sure all the guarding is in place, it's got light curtains or whatever safety features are in place, everything is going to meet those ANSI B11 standards. And if you have that in writing and you know you've gone through that proper process, I would really go back to them if something isn't up to standard for you. All right. So verify that any piece of equipment that you get, even if it's brand new and that manufacturer says it meets those standards, actually go through and make sure it does meet those ANSI B11 standards. There's an easy tool to use to make sure that equipment, the guarding is in place that's correct. So if you have anything like, say, expanded steel or anything with holes in it, you got, this is called a gotcha stick, and you can get these pretty much anywhere that sells safety equipment. Amazon, Granger, Fastenal, anybody's got their version of a gotcha stick. So you put this through the holes on there and make sure that that machine, that before it reaches that point of operation, wherever that contact point is, that the gotcha stick is not going to reach it. All right. Removing a guard should always be done under the lockout program. So you shouldn't have employees just removing guards. A lot of times you'll see a guard just gets taken off, set aside, and that equipment gets put back in service and started, and nobody's ever replaced that guard. Well, if they're taking that guard out, they should be locking that equipment out. So making sure you're being very strict with the enforcement of that policy, that if an employee takes off a guard, that equipment's locked out. They've gone through that process. Every employee that's working in that locked out equipment should be locked out, and that guard be put back on appropriately before the lock is removed. So definitely that's been one issue that I've had with employees, that if they remove guards without locking it out and putting it back in service, really getting into the disciplinary process, because that is critical. That when guards don't get put back on, bad things can happen. Um, and inspect those machines regularly. So every week or every month, whatever your company can do, actually send somebody around to look at all the equipment, going by a checklist, and actually looking to make sure those guards, those weird things that people might remove or modify, get caught right away and put back in service correctly, or fixed, a work order entered, that machine taken out of service, whatever it's going to take to make sure that equipment's put back together correctly. All right. So that wraps up the 5 things that I went through from OSHA's top 10 cited. So if you have any questions on these, I would be happy to answer any questions. So I see these things a lot out in private industry, and there's a lot of easy tricks and tips to make it easier to comply with these OSHA standards that a lot of companies break and cause a lot of injuries and fatalities in the work site. So let's not get complacent. Go through them and really reach those low-hanging fruit. A lot of these things are easily fixed. It just takes following up on them and making sure everybody knows what's expected. So thank you very much, and have a safe day.